When we remember a time, we remember moments. A kaleidoscope of the sights, the sounds, the emotions that remind us of the way we were. Our world. It's about time. Here are Linda Ellerby and Ray Gandolf.
For the next hour, think of your television set as a time machine.
Buckle up tight and maybe turn down the volume. Where we're going tonight, it's loud and dangerous.
Welcome to a few extraordinary weeks in 1968. For the first time, the young are seeing history being made before it's censored by their elders. They see it in a national mirror called television. Our story takes place inside that mirror. It will begin in January in downtown Saigon, move through the snowy streets of New Hampshire, and end one Sunday night in March in the Oval Office and on television. It will be a sort of mini-series, more powerful than the winds of war. Call this one the Winds of Change.
As 1968 began, Lyndon Johnson was fighting a war on poverty in this country and a war on communists in Vietnam, and he apparently was having success on both fronts. Then his National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders told the president that the country was moving toward two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal, not the direction the Great Society was supposed to be going. As for the war in Vietnam in January, the president was getting rose-colored reports.
I said it here, and I said it earlier this morning to the members of Congress. We're making steady progress in Vietnam.
I am absolutely certain that whereas in 1965 the enemy was winning, today he is certainly losing.
The enemy has been defeated in battle after battle.
Strange days have found us. Strange days have tracked us down.
In Vietnam, in early January, 500,000 Americans are fighting the enemy and fighting him on his own turf, in the jungles, the rivers, the rice paddies. The American government likes to say we have broken the back of the enemy, but there is a sense this January that something is about to happen.
Documents captured at Dak To recently indicate the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong may be beginning a new phase of all-out war.
We knew there was going to be a big attack.
General William Westmoreland is commander of all U.S. troops in Vietnam.
Intelligence was not complete, but we were convinced that something major was going to happen.
January 31st. In coordinated attacks all over South Vietnam, the Viet Cong shatter the ceasefire they themselves have called in honor of Tet, the Lunar New Year.
I was sleeping in this little room on the 4th floor of our embassy in downtown Saigon.
Alan Wendt is the duty officer at the embassy that night.
All of a sudden, there was a loud explosion. So loud that it literally shook everything that was in this room. And I just could not imagine what was going on, but I quickly realized that we were being attacked.
A squad of 20 Viet Cong sappers, suicide commandos, has blown a hole in the wall of the embassy compound. Now they are inside the compound. As a small contingent of MPs and Marine Guards keep them at bay, Wendt gets an urgent call from Washington. The call is from the State Department Situation Room. The caller is Philip Habib.
He began to tell me as much as he knew from his limited point of view. It was quite clear that he needed a little bit of calming down, and you can imagine, and I wouldn't blame him. He was quite excited.
He said to me, "Alan, what the hell's going on out there?" And I held up the phone and said, "Phil, listen to it." And just when I did that, another rocket thudded into the building, so he could actually hear what was going on.
There's machine gun fire now. No one seems to know here how many. A tremendous explosion in the compound.
Don North is covering the embassy attack for ABC News.
Some of the most dramatic gunplay, I suppose, was when one of the embassy officers had a grease gun and edged up to the window very, very carefully because he knew they were heavily armed sappers, reached the grease gun in without aiming and just sprayed it around inside the room. And moments later, Colonel Jacobson turned up inside the building, but unarmed. And someone threw him a forward pass of a .45 automatic, and he killed the last sapper alive in the embassy at that time.
When the battle ends, 19 Viet Cong sappers are dead. 5 Americans are dead, but the commandos never made it inside the embassy building itself.
So I went up to the top of the building, inspected every floor on the way down. When I came out of the building, it was about the largest concentration of media that I have ever seen. And I said, there have been some setbacks around the country, but this is going to result in a big defeat of the enemy. And they looked at me as if I didn't have all my faculties.
He always popped up to somehow put a good face on whatever was happening. But the reality this time just didn't wash with what the general was telling us.
The communists were beaten back, but they had changed the nature of the war, brought it out of the jungles by simultaneously attacking more than 100 cities and towns. The street fighting in Saigon was brought into our homes by television crews and by still cameramen like Eddie Adams.
And so I started taking pictures of just walking this prisoner. You know, he had his hands tied behind his back, and they were just leading him down the street. And I was standing there just watching what they were doing, and all of a sudden, General Luan, who was then a colonel, he was and I didn't know who he was at the time. He was actually a full colonel and the chief of police for South Vietnam. And as soon as he went for his pistol, I mean, as soon as he raised his pistol, I raised the camera, took a picture, not knowing that he was going to shoot him. And what had happened, and he put his pistol down, put it back in his holster, walked away, and came right by us, and he said, "They killed many of my men and many of your people," and walked away.
The prisoner had killed one of General Luan's officers, but his execution was summary and brutal. Adams' unforgettable picture won him a Pulitzer Prize and appeared on front pages all over the world. Satellites were beaming the horror of Tet into front rooms all over the world. President Johnson convened his advisors at the White House. His press secretary was George Christian.
He had no idea that it would be of the intensity that it was. And as more and more news reports and intelligence reports from Vietnam built up during that period, he became more and more concerned that things might come unraveled.
Still, President Johnson told the press corps on February 2nd that the Tet Offensive was not an enemy victory.
The biggest fact is that the stated purposes of the general uprising, a military victory or a psychological victory, have failed.
Hugh Sidey covered that White House briefing for Life magazine.
And I can remember precisely when the Tet Offensive struck. I mean, here you have a handful of troops that can bring explosives and attack the American embassy, and then they claim that they're winning this war and they've defeated the enemy. And we just said, it's obvious things are worse than anybody knows.
Jack Valenti was no longer a White House aide, but he remained a confidant of the president.
We blew the North Vietnamese away. They lost 40,000 men plus in that engagement. But in politics, as in real life, perception is reality. And what people saw on the television tube was perception, but it was also real to them. When you see Viet Cong 4 feet, 10 feet from the door of the U.S. Embassy before they were finally killed, somebody said, my God, if they can get that close to the embassy, the war's over.
The war wasn't over, and television didn't go away. Historian Will Durant put it like this: the hand that turns the dial rules the air. Come back to February 1968, to Prime Time, Grenoble, Vietnam, and Uncle Walter.
Our world will continue with winds of change in the winter of '68.
One memorable night.
Thanks, Rob.
At the Silver Bullet.
Hey, you're Don Adams, right?
Yes. One Coors Light, please.
Would you believe 2 Coors Lights?
Great.
Ring, ring. Hello? It's for you, Don.
Terrific.
Thanks. Mind if I join you?
Mind if I pour?
Not at all. Missed it by that much.
There's no slowing down with the Silver Bullet tonight.
Just did.
Here's some great value news from Ford. Right now on Ranger, you can get 3.9% financing or up to $1,000 cash back. Add a special option package and save up to $2,111. Great savings on other Ford trucks, too. See your Ford dealers soon.
In 1 minute, Americans eat 908 pounds of Mexican food. And in about 1 minute, you can microwave Mexican flavors of Cheese Whiz to make all that Mexican food taste better. Cheese Whiz processed cheese spread, the marvelous microwave in a minute Mexican cheese sauce.
Sir, would you choose hamburger A, a Wendy's hamburger with fresh toppings, or hamburger B, which uses things like reconstituted onions?
I'd pick B because it's got reconstituted onions. I'm working on tomatoes myself. Got them shrunk down to the size of a garden pea. I got 300 or 400 of them right here in my pocket.
Wouldn't you choose the fresh hamburger? Choose Wendy's.
Hey, Dad! Ooh, Daddy, your shirt. What happened?
Don't ask.
It's that shirt.
Ugh. Introducing Surf, the new liquid detergent that gets out not just dirt and stains, but odors, too.
It's the shirt. And it looks clean, guys. It's not smelly. Okay.
Thanks.
New Surf removes both the dirt and the odors.
Strange, exotic, unique. Travel off the coast of Ecuador to the Galapagos. Here, author Peter Benchley explores some of nature's rarest creatures, both beneath the sea and on land. It's Mutual of Omaha's Spirit of Adventure, Sunday on ABC Sports.
Welcome back to the lighter side of February 1968. The Nehru jacket was enjoying a brief season of glory, on its way from clothing store to Goodwill bag before you could say Jawaharlal Nehru. Gasoline was only about 34 cents a gallon, and still the oil companies felt they had to lure you into the station. They sponsored 304 giveaway contests of one kind or another that winter. Sinclair had Dino dollars. Sunny dollars were the big thing at Sunoco stations. If you had the right combination, matched up the right halves, you could win anything from $1 to $1,000. Didn't even have to buy gas. You didn't have to watch the war news on television either. It was pretty raw stuff. And if you didn't watch the news, stuck with the prime time shows, you'd hardly know there was a war on. Gomer Pyle, Marine, might as well be in Mayberry.
Pyle, I'm putting you in the color guard for parade formation on Saturday. Cool.
And in Mayberry, Sheriff Andy Taylor wears the only uniform.
Forget about your cares, it is time to relax at the junction.
There are no protest marches in Petticoat Junction.
Television was very quiet.
Producer George Schlatter.
It had not changed noticeably in 10 years. It was all the family relationships, cowboy shows, and chit-chat. And here came this explosion in the middle of a sea of tranquility as far as television was concerned.
Sock it to me, sock it to me, sock it to me, sock it to me, sock it to me.
Sock it to me?
Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In.
Schlatter's new comedy show that season was an exception to the television pablum diet. Laugh-In had everything but a sacred cow. Anything was fair game. It fired scattershot at everything from LSD to LBJ.
I am the government.
Till I die.
Very interesting.
Don't blink, don't sneeze, you might miss something.
Item, Washington, D.C., 1988. President Ronald Reagan today denied once again that he is a candidate for the office of governor of California.
Schlatter's bosses were puzzled.
And the first time they saw it, NBC was very unhappy with it. They said, what did you do? You and your crazy friends just took a lot of our money and went out and had a good time. And we said, well, what's the problem? They said, well, nobody can understand it. And we said, well, you laughed, and the audience is certainly more intelligent than... And so they said, well, they would air it if we slowed it down. And then we knew we were right, so we went back and tightened it up a little bit more.
Well, it's time to say goodnight, Dick.
Good night, Dick.
Good night, Dick.
Good night, Dick.
Communications with our youth has broken down, so I have decided to visit them in Canada.
The inescapable war and President Johnson's handling of it dominate the presidential primary campaigns.
You say yes, I say no. You say stop, and I say go, go, go.
From the Democratic Party's left, Senator Eugene McCarthy declares war on the war.
And the entire history of this war in Vietnam, no matter what we call it, has been one of continued error and of misjudgment.
Senator Robert Kennedy is not yet a candidate, but he sounds like one.
The history of conflict among nations does not record another such lengthy and consistent chronicle of error as we have shown in Vietnam.
Candidate George Wallace is also unhappy.
And I would ask my Attorney General to proceed for indictments against every person in this country who advocates victory of the communists.
Is the Republican frontrunner a new Richard Nixon?
If people looking at me say that's a new Nixon, then all that I can say is, well, maybe you didn't know the old Nixon.
Michigan's Governor George Romney is also running, but he will withdraw before the first primary battle in New Hampshire in mid-March. In February, television took us to another snowy battlefield in Grenoble, France.
The 10th Winter Olympic Games, brought to you in color by satellite.
Cameras do not evaluate, they transmit, whether it's war pictures or the grace and beauty of the Olympics. Grenoble was the first Olympics broadcast in color, and with the then startling number of 36 cameras. Jim McKay covered the Olympics for ABC Sports.
We call them minicams, but they had great long black cables with them instead of the slender cable that we have today. They were not remotely controlled, and they were huge. I don't know what they weighed, but they would break the back of even the strongest cameraman.
This country's best hope for a gold medal at Grenoble did not attend the opening ceremonies. 19-year-old Peggy Fleming.
The next morning at 6 a.m., we started competing. So my coach and parents didn't think that that was too wise to risk getting sick at this point and get overtired or whatever. And I watched it on TV.
The pressure more and more was on Peggy, although the skating is actually in the comparatively early part of the games. And there she was at Grenoble in her pale green dress, as I recall, skating what she said later I think was not her best performance.
I just wanted to get through it. I was 89 points ahead of the second girl, just going into the free skating phase. So all I had to do was stand up. I mean, I didn't have to give the best performance in free skating of my life. All I had to do was live through those 4 minutes. And I always thought, well, something's going to go wrong. I'm going to, pass out in the middle of this number. And when I got through it and I was still standing up, I thought, gosh, I guess I did it. It was wonderful, and just, have the Star-Spangled Banner played in your honor, and I was real proud of myself and proud of the country that I was from.
The hero of the Olympics was Jean-Claude Killy of France, winner of 3 gold medals in skiing. But in the slalom, he had finished behind two skiers who were later disqualified. And one, Austria's Karl Schranz, protested.
He said, wait a minute. He said, on my second run where I missed that gate, the reason I missed the gate was because a guard or a policeman or somebody skied out in front of me on the course, and I would have hit him if I didn't ski off the course and miss the gate. The officials, we didn't see that.
Television came to the rescue with a not-so-instant replay.
Finally, the decision was made to come into our television truck. All the officials came in there for a couple of hours, as I recall, looked at the tape over and over again. So they watched and watched and watched, and finally they came out and said, sorry, nobody came out in front of you. Jean-Claude Killy wins the third gold medal.
A wild race and a long day, but once again, Killy has done it.
As far as I know, and I'm pretty sure of it, that was the first time that television was ever used to decide the result of a sports event.
The Olympic Wars on the electronic battlefield produced some medals and no casualties. But in Washington, it is the Vietnam War that continues to preoccupy most of the Johnson administration. Not everybody in the White House is so preoccupied. In February, Lady Bird Johnson holds a Discover America fashion show. For '68, these clothes were tame. Everywhere else, anything goes and everything went.
Color sky, Havana Lake. Color sky, rose carmethine. Alizari and crimson. Where your love like heaven. Where your love like heaven. Where your love like heaven.
Do people really dress like that? No. Then what are designers doing? One of them, John Weitz, explains.
Whatever it is that you read in retrospect of 18 years ago is the reflection of a lot of fashion shows we used to do. And fashion shows are usually enormous nonsense. They're very entertaining, and that's all.
Color in sky, Prussian blue.
Alternatives to the suit and tie, the Nehru jacket, medallions, turtlenecks, and White's design for a ranchero scarf to be worn instead of a tie.
I tried to forget the flops, and I honestly don't remember. I'm sure that ranchero scarves were a flop.
Hey, Joe, where you going with that gun in your hand?
February 24th. In Vietnam, the Marines retake the ancient city of Hue after a month of bloody, house-to-house fighting. The once beautiful city is destroyed in the process. The price in human lives is terrible. Later, we learned just how terrible. When the communists first took over, they executed 3,000 civilians. We didn't see that on television. What we saw and heard was that in 1 week, 542 Americans were killed in Vietnam. There were just too many bodies to ignore. Newspapers began to change their minds editorially. Doubts about Vietnam began to spread. The next to doubt was CBS anchorman Walter Cronkite.
I went to Dick Salant, who was our president of CBS News, and said, you know, I think that maybe it's time for one of us, and I'd like to be the one who does it, goes out there and says just what it looks like to a reasonably astute, informed observer.
Cronkite and his crew travel around Vietnam. He interviews officials, officers, and soldiers. And then on February 27th, in a primetime news special, Walter Cronkite said what had to be said.
I was going to have to say that I didn't think we were winning in Vietnam, that the Viet Cong offensive, the North Vietnamese offensive, indicated we were not in the position that we thought we were before the Tet Offensive. So I put together my piece, and at the end of the factual report, I said, I'm going to take off that hat now, factual reporter. I'm going to deliver a rare thing in these columns, a commentary.
When Cronkite came back and pointed out the flaws that he saw, it had an impression on Johnson, most certainly did. Well, I remember him telling me words to the effect, if we've lost Walter Cronkite, we're going to lose a whole lot of people.
One thing Lyndon Johnson was always good at was counting, or so he believed. That is Eugene McCarthy. He's the politician who said being in politics is like being in football. You have to be smart enough to understand the game and dumb enough to think it's important. What he meant was that he could count too. Come back to 1968, to the electronic battlefield of New Hampshire. Or is that a football field? Either way, bring your mittens. It gets real windy up there, even outdoors.
Come back to our world and winds of change in the winter of '68.
Get your spaghetti ready. Get ready for new Ragu Thick and Hearty Spaghetti Sauce. Our thickest, heartiest sauce ever. Now your spaghetti's ready. New Ragu Thick and Hearty.
This mirror reveals the whole truth. This woman just washed with soap. See the makeup and dirt soap leaves? I recommend Pond's Cold Cream to lift away what soap doesn't for cleaner, beautiful skin. No soap does what Pond's does beautifully.
Strength, pride, tradition. For centuries, the Clydesdale has been known as a special breed. Today, the Clydesdales symbolize Budweiser's dedication to quality, superior ingredients, exclusive beechwood aging, and a distinctively clean, crisp taste that only Budweiser can offer. Quality taste. Because this Bud's for you.
Say you're Dave Kozach. What you do for a living is deliver beer. You cover 90,000 square miles of desert and snow to handle 125 customers. How do you do it?
Yeah, 15 cases of long neck light and 4 half.
With an automated telemarketing system. Using our long-distance network, you access the company's computers so you can fill more orders than you ever did. From equipment to networking, from computers to communications.
Deliver that today. I'm right in the neighborhood.
AT&T is the right choice.
It seemed like I was born with a cold. Always sneezing. Always sniffling. Even congested. Dude, but those weren't just colds. They were allergy attacks. So I got Chlortrimeton. Chlortrimeton's made just for allergies. So don't treat your allergy like it's just a common cold. Take Chlortrimeton.
Our world will be right back.
My green tambourine.
On the Disney Sunday Movie.
Jeffrey Wilder is now an indestructible man.
An invincible man against impossible odds. I-Man.
You got a hunger. It's late at night. Late night drive through Burger King.
Burger King, the best food for fast times.
Wow!
New burger bundles. New mini hamburgers. From Burger King. Are these good or what? Burger King, the best food for fast times.
Time takes you beyond the news.
Time flies and you are there. Time cries and lets you care. You understand the world we share.
This week in Time, Alan Greenspan, America's new inflation fighter. The AIDS debate, who should be tested? And Mount St. Helens, a devastated landscape recovers.
Read time and understand.
The Bakers create chaos on their return to a PTL resort attempt.
Welcome back to 1968. Our story takes place between the end of January and the end of March. It's about war and television. The Vietnam War is being fought on television, also the war to end the war, several political wars, and one ski slope war. No wonder a kind of performance reality has evolved, one where image counts at least as much as truth. Of course, a notion like that can get you in trouble because, as Lyndon Johnson once pointed out, while you're saving your face, you're losing your ass. He did not.
And government's reality evolves And where image counted more than truth was the psychedelic saloon, for want of a better phrase. Places like Fillmore East, which opened that winter in New York City, were concert stages where kids could come and drink a 7-Up, maybe sneak a joint or a tab of LSD, and watch the Doors or the Grateful Dead or an artist like Janis Joplin singing as if her heart would break or her larynx. It was a distortion of sound, of mind, and many of our kids embraced it because they had looked at the real world and didn't like what they saw. And some very straight establishment adults looked at the war in Vietnam that winter when the winds of change were blowing and changed their minds. One was the brand new Secretary of Defense.
I, Clark M. Clifford, do solemnly swear. Do solemnly swear.
Clark Clifford has been a trusted advisor to presidents, Democratic presidents, for 20 years, and he's known to be a strong supporter of Johnson's Vietnam policy.
I reflected what the public reflected, and that was that we were prevailing and that almost any time the war would be over.
But in his first few weeks in office, Clifford's view of the war and Johnson's policies takes a dramatic turn.
I can't tell you how many hours in what is known as the tank with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I couldn't find out what our plan was for victory in Vietnam. The reason I couldn't find out was we didn't have any. And it was at that time that I changed my entire opinion of the war in Vietnam.
What a field day for the heat. 1,000 people in the street singing songs and they carry inside.
Then there are those who don't think we ought to be fighting this war in the first place, and have been saying so for some time now. Not all of them are males of an age to be drafted. Not all of them are young. In '68, the young are divided too, and not just by the war. Here is one side.
Sense of compliments, meaningless bounds. Turn on, tune in, turn your eyes around. Look at yourself.
Here's the other side, psychedelic, and even if you didn't drop acid, LSD, the music could often make you feel as if you did. Jimi Hendrix. Janis Joplin. Jim Morrison and the Doors. Jefferson Airplane. Paul Kantner played guitar for the Airplane.
I don't want to glorify drugs, but in '68, early '68 anyway, drugs were still relatively cool in the society. In those days, drugs were almost not the main thing. They were just an attendant sacrament almost to the wonder that you were experiencing.
But by March, the counterculture is a consumer item, and its chief capitalist is poster artist Peter Max. His work shows up on posters, but also on motor scooters, even a line of clocks by General Electric.
But this way I'm able to give art to the people, to my friends on this planet.
There was no strategy on my end to capitalize, and so maybe I was the most withered person at the time visually, and so all the corporations wanted to take my works and apply them on their stuff.
We'll ride on the rain, we'll sail on your touch, I'll talk to your eyes that I love so much.
Rod McEwen. Call him the capitalist of romance. This gravelly-voiced singer and poet releases an incredible 4 albums between February and March. Good vibes are big business.
Well, it's odd because all of a sudden your name's in public domain. I mean, on the one hand, it's a big treat to wake up in the morning without knowing anything about it in advance and find yourself in Peanuts or Pogo.
And his book, Listen to the Warm, is a bestseller. How does it sound today?
Is love collective? Not anymore, it's not. We're lucky if it lives above the jukebox bleat. And so when I think of love and loving, I think of people dying alone for lack of love. These are the days of the dancing, 6 feet apart. Discotheque has tapped that time of loving into time. Mr. Roebuck still likes Mr. Sears. Abercrombie's stuck with Fitch all these years. There must be others out there somewhere. But where?
Certainly not at Khe Sanh. Since the Tet Offensive began in January, some 6,000 Marines have been pinned down at this outpost. They are steadily bombarded by rockets and mortar fire. They are surrounded by 20,000 North Vietnamese regular troops, under siege and waiting. Jeff Gralnick is covering Khe Sanh for CBS News.
Once siege mentality had settled in, the Marines there were, in effect, live bait. Right? What the military wanted, what the military felt it needed, was a set-piece battle.
In Washington, Lyndon Johnson is obsessed with holding Khe Sanh. He has a scale model of the base in the White House, and he has pledged that Khe Sanh will never be another Dien Bien Phu, the decisive defeat that drove the French out of Vietnam in 1954 and whose anniversary is approaching. Meanwhile, the Marines at Khe Sanh wait.
You couldn't approach Khe Sanh except by air. C-123s were being shot down, C-130s were being blown up on the runway, helicopters were being shot down, C-130s had come in at 500 feet, dropped stuff all over what was left of the runway, and then hightail it up and out of the way.
When the weather is clear, the fury of American air power is called to the hills surrounding the base. Newsweek says it best, the agony of Khe Sanh.
It was like living in a latrine. There was an inescapable aroma at Khe Sanh that nobody could put their finger on. It just smelled like Khe Sanh. It was awful duty.
On March 10th, the New York Times publishes a leaked report that General Westmoreland has asked for 206,000 more troops, a 40% increase in our commitment. And for a war we've been told we're winning. 2 days later, in the icy waters of the New Hampshire primary, the president's political strength will be tested for the first time since the Tet Offensive. The Inquisitor, Senator Eugene McCarthy, has been campaigning vigorously all over the state against the war.
Senator Eugene McCarthy in New Hampshire. Our country, right or wrong. When right, to be kept right. When wrong, to be put right. Vote McCarthy, March 12th.
I think almost anybody running against Johnson on any platform, in a one-on-one in the Democratic Party could have gotten more than 12%, maybe 20%. And with the addition of the war issue, why you could figure maybe 10% more.
The president's name is not on the ballot, but his campaign machine is urging a write-in vote. McCarthy's campaign has caught the hearts and minds and energy of the young. College students invade New Hampshire by the busload, even getting a shave and a haircut to be clean for Gene. McCarthy does better than even he expected, 42% of the vote to Johnson's 49%.
We were able to claim an absolute victory in terms of delegates and a relative victory in terms of what it had been said we'd get in the way of a popular vote.
This may have been almost as big a shock to Johnson as the Tet Offensive, because this was his world. This is the supreme politician. This is the man who has risen from the hill country of Texas from nothing on his savvy about votes, elections, and people.
Robert Kennedy is still not a candidate, and he will not become a candidate if President Johnson will accept a deal. Kennedy's press secretary was Frank Mankiewicz.
He had made a proposal. He had used Ted Sorensen to go to Clark Clifford, who was then the Secretary of Defense, and in a sense put that proposition forward, that a commission of wise men might perhaps study the situation, would come up with recommendations, the president would abide by them, and if the president would agree to do that, then Senator Kennedy would not run.
So I went immediately to President Johnson repeated in detail what Ted Sorensen had said to me, and President Johnson summarily said, not acceptable. Just go tell Sorensen right away, I want no part of it. Let him do anything he chooses to do.
I am announcing today my candidacy for the presidency of the United States. I do not run for the presidency merely to oppose any man, but to propose new policies.
President Johnson does decide to consult with wise men about the war, wise men of his own choosing.
President Johnson had a number of outside advisors, people who had served in previous administrations, who had been troubleshooters, who had been military people.
People like former Secretary of State Dean Acheson, former Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Maxwell Taylor. Nearly 5 months earlier at the White House, the wise men, nearly all hawks, had supported the president's Vietnam policy. Now, the birds were not all of a feather.
And I briefed on the political diplomatic situation. I remember a few things about the briefing. For example, I remember at one stage very clearly Clark Clifford saying to me, did I think that a military solution was feasible? And my answer was that in the circumstances and under the restrictions that were imposed, that I didn't think that was foreseeable in any foreseeable period of time. And I recommended very flatly and directly that we go for a bombing halt and a negotiation.
He invited them back, spent afternoon and part of a morning with them, and was shocked to find out that almost everyone had changed his mind.
Come back to the last weekend in March of 1968, when Lyndon Johnson takes a good look at his cards and folds his hand.
Our world continues. Winds of change in the winter of '68.
Today, millions of Miracle-Gro gardeners are getting wonderful results with this amazing invention, the Miracle-Gro No-Clog Garden Feeder. It's the fastest, easiest feeder I've ever used. Well, now you can use it to feed your lawn, because now there's new Miracle-Gro Lawn Food. It makes lawn care so easy, just drop in and spray on. You'll feed your whole lawn in minutes. You'll see lush green results in days. New Miracle-Gro Lawn Food for a Miracle-Gro lawn you'll be proud of.
Would you choose Hamburger A, a Wendy's hamburger in which you get the fresh toppings you want, or Hamburger B, where you take the toppings they give you?
B. I'm not used to getting what I want. I went to the beauty parlor and asked for a glamorous hairdo. I don't think I got it. What do you think?
I love it.
Wouldn't you choose the fresh hamburger? Choose Wendy's.
What do you see here? Tools, mechanics, a service department, much like any other. But there is a difference here that's not so apparent. It's an attitude. And it's brought a host of improvements to benefit Buick customers. From diagnostic computers to a toll-free customer assistance number to what is possibly the industry's most rigid new car delivery process. It's an attitude that says the Buick customer is special. And that's a fact. Buick, where better really matters.
Friday, Sledge is all shook up over some offbeat murders.
I'll get that beef jerky, and when I do...
Sledgehammer. And Mr. Belvedere's behind bars.
Do you have anything to say? You look lovely in black.
There, Barbara Carrera and Tony Geary are caught in the mysterious web of seduction
I think the dark's exciting.
and murder. Sins of the past. After Sledgehammer and Mr. Belvedere.
Tomorrow.
Welcome back to March 1968. A presidency shaped by and haunted by television is about to reach a fitting climax. Fitting because it will take place on television. It is the last weekend in March. President Lyndon Johnson has said he will speak to the nation on Sunday night. He plans to announce he is willing, once again, to stop bombing North Vietnam as an incentive to peace. It is not all he will announce. Later, Johnson would say that doing what's right isn't the problem. It's knowing what's right.
Sitting here resting my bones, and this loneliness won't leave me alone.
In late March of '68, Lyndon Johnson was looking for assurance and finding doubt. His approval rating in the Gallup poll had fallen to its lowest ebb. The war had put many of his plans for the Great Society on hold. And trusted old allies like Martin Luther King told him he was wrong.
I have become deeply disenchanted with President Johnson. I feel that he is so emotionally involved in the war in Vietnam and so concerned about saving face more than achieving peace.
With Bobby Kennedy now in the presidential race, Johnson knew he was up against not just a candidate, but Camelot.
What he was looking at, of course, was that Senator Kennedy was going to beat him for the nomination, and that he would wind up then in history as a sort of a between two bookends, each one of which a Kennedy.
Lyndon Johnson was exhausted. Secretary of State Dean Rusk.
Except for the men and women who carried the battle out there and their families, no one in this country agonized over Vietnam more than did Lyndon Johnson. We could never stop him from getting up at 4:30 or 5 in the morning to go down to the operations room to check on the casualties from Vietnam. Every one of those took a little piece out of him.
On the day before his Vietnam speech, Johnson worked with the man who wrote it, Harry McPherson.
He said, oh, you can, that's all right. You don't have to worry about the length. I think I want to have an ending of my own. And he walked on out of the room, and I turned around to Clifford and said, is he going to say sayonara? Goodbye? Clifford looked at me as if I were an idiot.
On television's Hollywood Palace, the night before the president made his speech, Jimmy Durante sang prophetically about Old Man Time.
Old man Time, he's so mean. Meanest man you ever see. He gives you youth and he steals it away.
Sunday, March 31st, Washington, D.C.
And they took very heavy, make it be a they there.
With a crude videotape recorder, Lyndon Johnson rehearses what will be his most famous speech.
His secretary and I sat there with him and made little changes in what he was doing. I don't know any other speech that he ever rehearsed to this extent. Sometimes he went over them, but this one had to be perfect.
Johnson called me and said, what do you think about the speech? A peculiar question, since I'd been doing nothing else for 2 months. So I think it's okay. I'm glad it's coming out the way it did. And he said, I've got my own ending I'm putting on. I said, so I've heard. He said, do you know what's in it? I said, I'm afraid I do. And I'm really sorry. And he said, well, okay, thanks, partner.
And I can remember that Sunday evening sitting down from the television set and cross-legged on my rug, and I watched, and the speech went on just as I expected it.
Now, the President of the United States.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. Tonight I want to speak to you of peace in Vietnam and Southeast Asia. Tonight, I renew the offer I made last August to stop the bombardment of North Vietnam.
When the speech ended, or should have ended, he said, and then I have something else to add, and instantly, without any other word, I knew precisely what was coming, that he was going to do it.
I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
The Johnson presidency. In a way, it has become another casualty of Vietnam. Later, in his memoirs, Johnson writes about that night, and tonight, actor Dennis Weaver reads some of what Johnson had to say.
In 45 minutes, I had finished. It was all over, and I felt better. The weight of the day and the weeks and the months had lifted. I had done what I knew ought to be done. Now it was history, and I could do no more. Just before I drifted off to sleep that night, I prayed that Hanoi had listened and would respond. The chance for peace, the opportunity to stop death and destruction, the opening toward a new decade of hope. All these were enfolded in the words I had spoken. There was nothing more I could do that day. All that I could do, I had done.
Come back to our world after the winter of 1968, to some things we saw on television and some things we did not.
Our world continues in a moment.
Ford has real value news for you right now. You can get 3.9% financing on Ford Bronco 2 or get $1,000 cash back. Add a special option package and save up to $1,965. Great savings on other Ford trucks, too. See your Ford dealers soon.
My Daredevil needs more than knee pads to protect his little bones. He needs Kraft Singles. Unlike imitations, Kraft is made from 5 ounces of milk per slice. Plus, his bones get calcium. Let my Daredevil go unprotected? Not with Kraft Singles.
Thanks. You know, I've been noticing something that's been happening over the past couple years. Trend, I guess. Drunks aren't funny anymore. Drunk drivers, drunk workers, drunk anybody. And it really does seem that more people are starting to respect the difference between a few and a few too many. And that's kind of nice.
Tonight, the other scandal rocking Washington, charges that former Reagan aides improperly helped a company get millions in government contracts. Watch 2020 tonight.
Welcome back to the legacy of the television battles of those few weeks in 1968. On the last day of March, the television battles of Lyndon Johnson ended. But when Johnson stepped out of the picture tube remained filled with images of war and violence at home, which is to say, the mirror remained accurate, and the winds continued to blow.
This is the end, my only friend, the end.
On April 4th, Martin Luther King Jr. was shot to death outside a motel in Memphis, Tennessee. He was 39.
So, my thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there.
Moments after Robert Kennedy claimed victory in the California primary, he was shot to death in the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. The convention he never got to in Chicago was the most outrageous in American history. For 5 days, police and National Guardsmen clubbed, gassed, and arrested anti-war demonstrators and bystanders as well. 3 superstars of the counterculture became victims of their own excesses. Jim Morrison of The Doors died of a heart attack at 27. Jimi Hendrix died from an overdose of barbiturates in 1970. 16 days later, Janis Joplin died from booze, drugs, and perhaps her own rage. The war in Vietnam continued until 1975. 7 years and 1 month from President Johnson's speech, Saigon fell to the communists. We watched it on TV.
Governments also learned from the television war. They learned they didn't want to fight their wars on television unless they controlled the television. And that is why these pictures of the American invasion of Grenada in 1983 were taken by the United States government. Neither journalists nor their cameras were allowed to come along for the ride. The politicians explained we might get hurt. Also, we might blow the surprise. And in 1982, when Great Britain went to war over the Falkland Islands, it controlled TV coverage. This is Calgary. At the Winter Olympics of 1988, it will be a busier place than it is now. And instead of 36 cameras, there will be close to 100 cameras.
Well, there it is the way it was in February and March of 1968. It was not just the reality of the Vietnam War that soured Lyndon Johnson's presidency. Americans had been dying in Vietnam when Eisenhower was president and would still be dying there under Gerald Ford. What changed that winter was our perception of the war. There was a new awareness that we would have to give more to the war to win it or settle for less than victory. And television did that. Never mind that the Tet Offensive failed. Television showed us the enemy at the gates of Saigon. It showed us a president crumbling a little more every day, right there in our living room. Television did not tell us whether to stay in the game or get out. It did show us what the stakes were.
And on the subject of the power of television, let's get one thing straight. The power of television is roughly that of a hula hoop. The power is in the pictures. And the most powerful pictures aren't always on television. For example, remember the day General Luan shot the prisoner in broad daylight and in front of cameras? Television showed us the moving pictures of what happened. We saw the general shoot, we saw the man fall. But the really moving picture was the one where nothing moved. This one. In Eddie Adams' picture, as in the life of the man who was shot, time is stopped. Nothing happens next. Forever. Except in your own mind. And that, too, is the power of a picture. And so it goes.
These things also happened in the winter of 1968.
For heroism at Da Nang, Lieutenant Jane Lombardi, an Air Force nurse, became the first woman to receive combat decorations in Vietnam.
Cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, was killed while testing a new plane.
At the ordination of an Episcopal priest in Berkeley, California, the hymns were played by a rock group, Mother's Laundry. The sermon was titled, God is Doing His Thing.
A new movie by Mel Brooks, the producers, featured a song and dance number called Springtime for Hitler.
In the first heavyweight title fight, in the new Madison Square Garden, Joe Frazier knocked out Buster Mathis in the 11th round.
In Memphis, Lisa Marie Presley, daughter of Elvis and Priscilla, was born.
In India, the Beatles were meditating with the Maharishi. For a transcript of this broadcast, send $3 to Our World Transcripts to John Street, New York, New York, 10038.
This is filmed before a live studio audience.